Okay, maybe you took a break, maybe you didn't. I didn't. I'm here. I'm right here talking. And we're going to talk about Renaissance theater. Renaissance means rebirth in French. Largely, when I talk about Renaissance, I mean from the 15th and the 16th centuries, as I said before. Specifically, when I'm talking about Italy. In Spain, same-ish time, 15th, 16th century, closer to 16th. France didn't really get there until the 17th century. And Elizabethan theater, I mean, the Renaissance in England happened a little bit later as well. England and France were constantly warring, and so they didn't have much time for culture. So let's start with Italy, because they were first. So the Italian theater of the Renaissance, most importantly means the Commedia dell'arte. Please click that link. Please watch it. It is crazy and awesome and bizarre and weird and very mask heavy. I think that you might like it. So Commedia dell'arte is professional improvised comedy which is performed for the masses in the streets. Big break from what we saw in the dawn of theater about how usually it was for the aristocrats, usually it was for the wealthiest. This is for the masses, everybody. You still get to see me drink a LaCroix. Usually it's about 7 men and 3 women, and it is ad-libbed action, dialogue, song, and dance around a scenario that usually involved love and intrigue. So the reason this was able to work is because it was based around a bunch of stock characters. And if you watch that video, then you will have seen that there are a bunch. But the 4 main stock characters that were in pretty much every single one are Harlequin, Pierrot, Columbine, and Pantalone. I don't know if I'm pronouncing all of those correctly. Harlequin was the clever, witty servant. Pierrot was lovelorn and moody. Columbine, flirtatious and pretty. And Pantalone is the gullible father. So basically, you have these set characters that exist, and then you've got actors who take a random scene, you know what improvising is, and think about, hey, what would my character do in this situation? How would my character interact with these other characters? And it's a pretty strong way of being able to consistently improvise and have an interesting story. If you can think of a show that you love to watch, any show, if you're a lover of The Office or Friends or whatever, it'd be very easy for any of those actors to take their character and just put them in a different situation. What would Chandler be like in this new situation? Community, whatever show that you like. These shows that have very strong, clear characters, just kind of throw them into a different situation and see how would they act here instead. Pretty fun and pretty easy and very accessible for the masses, as you can see. Now, Commedia dell'arte, even though it was for the masses, there were still elaborate costumes, elaborate masks, very richly painted, and of course it could run the gamut based on the troupe, right? You could have a very wealthy troupe that has very, very expensive fancy things, and you could have a less wealthy troupe that has, less advanced, less, more simple things that get across the same ideas. Let's move to Spanish theater of the Renaissance. So Cervantes, who wrote Don Quixote, or if you are my English teacher from UCLA, Don Quixote, they refuse to pronounce it in the Spanish way because the English at that time didn't. So they would say Don Quixote and Don Juan for Don Juan. It was infuriating. But anyway, Cervantes wrote 30 plays. Lope de Vega wrote 2,000 plays. That's so many plays. And they were often centered around romance, poetry, and action. And they pointedly and specifically ignored the unities of time and place that we talked about with Aristotle. So rather than taking place in one space, one time, they were free to write an adventure that spanned across, the countryside and told us something awesome. And they showed how Aristotle, smart guy, wasn't always right. French theater, like I said, got started a little bit later, and it was a little bit less widespread because of the constant Napoleonic Wars. However, you have ornate playhouses and elevated writing, and it is made mainly for the wealthy upper classes of society as opposed... Sorry, did I say Napoleonic Wars? It would not be Napoleonic. Napoleonic Wars happened later. They happened at the end of the 1700s, obviously. I apologize. But French. I'm having trouble. It's time for me to take a break. France had a lot of wars happening all the time, especially with England, who they hated. and probably still hate to today. It was made mainly for the wealthy upper-class members of society. The name that you should really know is Moliere. Moliere wrote lots and lots of satires, witty satires. Tartuffe is maybe the most popular one of his that you might read if you ever go to a college class where you read about Renaissance plays. And he actually changed his name. His name is not actually Moliere. His name was Jean-Baptiste Poquelin. But when he chose the theater, he did not want to disgrace the family name. We've talked about this before, how in not modern times, in older times, being an actor was disgraceful because you built your life on lying as opposed to something productive or good or truthworthy. He actually died on stage, making a play called The Imaginary Invalid. And invalid is the name of somebody who's very, very sick, and how ironic for him to die there. And then, almost done here, we're going to talk about Elizabethan theater. Elizabethan theater is Shakespeare's theater. So Queen Elizabeth is one of the first who brought theater a little more out of the shameful position that it was in because she loved it. She is the one that made it legit theater, real theater. The Black Plague in the 1600s definitely hurt English theater for a little while. The small German town that I told you who in 1633 was spared of the Black Plague, London was not spared. Certainly, it was too heavily populated for it to be spared by that epidemic. And theaters closed for a long time. And so if you ever hear sonnets, you read sonnets, that's why there are sonnets, because the theaters were closed and playwrights needed a way to make money, so they wrote poetry instead. So you've got Shakespeare, who wrote, obviously, 38 plays that are widely loved today. And you have two other giants that you might hear of, Christopher Marlowe and Ben Jonson. Christopher Marlowe and Shakespeare were rivals, really. Ben Jonson, not really a rival of Shakespeare, revered Shakespeare, came up a little bit after Shakespeare and wrote a beautiful poem about him dying and kind of as a tribute to him. This era is where we get a lot of our ideas about what theater is and should be, even though mostly men still acted all the parts. It would be about 100 years until women were included, and that would be in the Restoration period. So we'll talk about that right this second. So before we talk about that, we need a little bit of a history lesson. So Queen Elizabeth I died in 1603 and was succeeded by James I, who ruled until 1625. During this period, there was a lot of public unrest following from a lot of different things, but mostly the people thought that the monarchs were taking too much power for themselves. Ultimately, civil war broke out, and Oliver Cromwell, a Puritan leader and all-around terrible guy, gained control. England changed from a monarchy at this point to a protectorate, and Cromwell was the lead guy. Originally, it was not supposed to be hereditary. By the end of his reign, Oliver Cromwell tried to make it hereditary and make his son the next leader, and people did not like that, and then they ended up going back to the monarchy. But we'll get there. I say Oliver Cromwell is an all-around terrible guy because he gained a lot of notoriety in a positive way in England when he went through Ireland, killing the Irish as much as possible and forcing them onto the worst part of Ireland's land and taking the best parts for himself. So when you close your eyes and think of Ireland, you probably think of green rolling hills. And that is definitely true for the eastern side of Ireland. The west side of Ireland is very rocky, thin soil, and not very good to work on. Famously, he said that he hated Ireland because there was not a tree tall enough to hang a man from, water deep enough to drown him, nor soil deep enough to bury him. He hated it, and he was terrible. He actively hurt as many people as he wanted to do. Charles I, unfortunately for him, was beheaded, and the rest of his royal line, the Stuarts, fled to France. His famous last words, he was executed on a platform in the public area, which was wild, by the way. The king being beheaded by the people, absolutely wild. And he, when asked if he had any last words, he just said, "Give me another tunic, because it's kind of cold outside, and I don't want people to think I was shaking for fear." Unbelievable. Very cool guy. Well, I say that's a cool line. I don't know if he was a cool guy or not. The Puritans closed the theater in 1642 because they were dens of iniquity. Again, religion having a very weird relationship with the church where, okay, we can do things if they're about religion, but once they become about people, we hate it. And theater would not come back legally until 1660 when the monarchy was restored. Historical records, however, show that people were often arrested for illegally performing and attending performances. So people didn't stop even though it was illegal. As happens today, people still do illegal things even when they are made illegal. The Puritans tore down all the old Elizabethan playhouses, so new theaters needed to be constructed. And they were constructed much closer to the manner that we might recognize. So if you close your eyes and picture the theater that Abraham Lincoln was killed in, that's probably close to what an actual theater of that period was. So you're imagining, a stage with a big apron that you can perform on, tiered galleries that you can sit in, box seats where you're kind of looking, right down at the stage. And that's the sort of theater, much bigger and more accepted. Women were allowed to perform. How exciting! Hooray! Restoration plays were often silly and foolish. They were played as simple pleasures for the social elite primarily. Okay, that takes us through about 1800 or so, and we're going to talk about the push toward modern day from this point on. So, yeah, I hope you enjoyed those notes. I hope that you learned a little bit of something cool, and I will see you guys soon. Bye.